But I like the fact that students get to go out in the field. They get to get out of the classroom and do work that has real consequence. That matters to me a lot as a professor because I know that matters a lot to the students. I've heard that time and time again. And some of the students have formed friendships based on this work, either with their camera partners or with the people they've interviewed. And they've certainly had the opportunity to meet interesting people who they probably never would have met otherwise. So talk about a great educational opportunity. I also like the fact that many of the people we've interviewed have been really genuinely gratified to be interviewed. It can just be a big deal to know that your stories, your observations, your experiences matter to somebody else beyond your immediate family or whoever else. And to have it taken down and really recorded for perpetuity can be a pretty big deal. So that's a nice side effect too. I really like working with Klein Library, and I'm not saying that just because they're hosting me, but all the interviews are archived right here at Klein Library. You can look them up at the Special Collections website. You can, for most of them, you can see the video version, or in some cases hear an audio version. For all of them, you can read the transcript of the interview if you'd rather do that. And to me, the fact that we all can do that, and perhaps more important, the fact that people who aren't at the library can do that, whether they're in any country in the world with an internet connection, and whether they're doing that today or in 20 years or in 50 years or 100 years, that matters a lot. To me, this is really something that we are delivering to future generations. And one thing I know with great confidence about those future generations is they're going to be asking questions that we just haven't even thought about. And so it's going to be important to have this original source material of Feral Sakakuku talking on tape or all the other narrators. As somebody who does writing, moving around too much. As somebody who writes and who does public outreach, talks to the public through my writing, I really like the fact that we've been able to get material from this collection out to the public in a variety of formats. There's a book that came out this spring, which is outside there. There's this website, whatispass.net, which was created by Patrick McDonald here at the Bilby Research Lab here on the NAU campus, that talks about the project, has video excerpts and some of the nice photography and so on. And as Karen mentioned, we had this wonderful exhibit at the Pioneer Museum out there on Fort Valley Road. For me, as a writer who usually works in solitude, just with a computer and a telephone, it's really nice to be able to collaborate with creative people like Dan and Ryan and Patrick and others who have a whole different sensibility and a visual sensibility and can figure out the electronics behind a website and all that kind of stuff. So it's been highly collaborative, and that's really nice. I also think at the Pioneer Museum we're getting to an audience that we wouldn't get to otherwise. So that's been really gratifying for me. I also like the fact that in future semesters we're going to be working with some more students who are going to be doing some more focused oral history projects within the School of Communication. So we're really trying to integrate this research and creative work with the curriculum and with training future the students of today who are going to become maybe journalists or historians or environmental scientists or librarians or whatever they want to do. I think this is going to be good training for them. So that's been really gratifying, but that's not really what I'm here to talk about, and probably not what you're here to talk about, what you're here to hear about. You probably want to hear about the stories themselves, what's in these stories. I should say at the outset, one thing that I do tell my journalism students too, which is I'm sort of a professional storyteller, and I have a perhaps biased belief that stories are what make us human. We've been telling them since we were sitting around a campfire and sharing those stories about, I think there's a good place to go hunting over there, or there's going to be some good nuts to get there in a couple weeks or so. So telling stories for information and for entertainment is something that we've been doing for an awfully long time. And because you're in Flagstaff, I know a lot of you think that the best storytelling is still out there when you're camping or on a river trip. We know it is. So the journalist Jackie Benasinski put it this way: stories are the connective tissue of the human race. I really like that. They really are what binds us together. So I'll get back to that. But I think all of us have a hunger for stories. That's probably why you're all here. I want to play you a couple short excerpts from the interviews so you can get a sense of what they're like. And keep in mind that really the driving idea behind these was to get some sense about how environmental change has or has not played out in northern Arizona during the lives of the narrators. So let me start here. With a clip from Jack Metzger, who some of you know, he ranches on Anderson Mesa, just southeast of town. And some of you may know him, or certainly may know the work that he and his family have done with the Diablo Trust.
And what we're trying to do on the Diablo Trust is to stabilize these draw bottoms. And we have had great success with that. There's a couple draws on the ranch that when we first got part of this back in the 60s, you could ride horseback up the bottom of the draw and be eye level with the soil surface. And now the gully's it's almost all gone. It's kind of rounded over. It's about 2 feet deep. It has a full perennial plant community in the bottom.
Okay, so that's Jack Metzger talking about his observations of environmental change on his ranch. And before I talk about that, let me play another clip. Rose Gishi is it's Navajo shepherd. She raises sheep in the area near Indian Wells on the Navajo Nation.
I think we're not getting enough rain. Maybe that might be the problem, because I remember we used to have not very far from where we live, there used to be, there's a wash there, and all you do is dig up a hole, and dig up a hole in there, and it used to fill up with water, and we used to drink from there. We never thought of it as dirty or anything like that, but it was, it was clean when it came up to the top and filled up. And then another thing is the sheep used to, when they walk across there and their tracks in there, they used to have, it used to fill up with water. And now we don't have that no more.
Okay, so you can get a sense of what these histories are like. They're fairly structured in the sense of somebody the narrator sitting down usually, although I've interviewed 1 or 2 people who are kind of hard to sitting down and they kept popping up. So some are easier than others, but the narrator sitting down and someone operating the camera and then another interviewer asking the questions, and try to make sure that those are informed questions that are going to result in some good answers. And this, let me tell you, is a great training ground for students when they bring their interviews back into the classroom, because some have interviewed people who are talkers, and the hardest thing for the interviewer is saying, excuse me, I actually have a question for you. And then, of course, there are some interviewees who are the opposite, who are, I suppose, kind of like the Lutheran Norwegian farmers that Garrison Keeler talks about, where you can ask a question intended to get a really interesting, poetic, insightful answer, and you get a yep. Okay, so for teaching students about interviewing, this is a great. I found this is just priceless, because they're experiencing some of these, they're hearing about the other extremes from their fellow students, and maybe getting some ideas about how to deal with those situations. So again, educationally, I love doing this. But back to the accounts themselves and what's in them. What I like about these accounts here is how there is specific information in them about what the narrators have observed. And again, if you're living on land, you're going to pay attention to stuff like this. How deep was that gully? Well, it went from being so deep you could hardly see out of it to being 2 feet deep. That's almost like a number. Or have you noticed the way that animal footprints fill up in a wash? That maybe gets wet, and maybe the wash doesn't get wet anymore when the animal footprints are there. So those are pretty good observations, and maybe they haven't been measured quite the same way that a scientist would. But to me, they still constitute something that is kind of suspiciously like data. And if we're trying to reconstruct an environmental history of either these places, or if somebody in the future